Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a truly defining era in American history. We're going to explore how the institution of slavery and the absolutely devastating Civil War that followed deeply fractured the religious landscape of the United States. You know, we so often think of history strictly in terms of political debates and battlefield tactics. But the ideological and theological battles fought right there in the pews, they were just as fierce, and they left us with lasting consequences that we literally still see today.
Here is how we're going to break this all down today. We'll start with the abolitionist catalyst, followed by the Great Church Divide, and then we'll look at the churches that stayed united. After that, we dive into the idea of a holy civil war, Lincoln's nuanced view of the conflict, and we'll wrap up with the rise of the Black church.
All right, Section 1, the abolitionist catalyst sparking the divide. Let's start with the radical figures who forced the issue of slavery straight to the absolute forefront of American life, completely destroying any comfortable middle ground.
Now, to really grasp this, we need to look at how fast this crisis accelerated. Early anti-slavery sentiments were already brewing in the late 18th century. By 1784, Methodists were actually declaring that their members couldn't own slaves. Fast forward a bit, and we see the Independent African Methodist Episcopal Church forming in 1814, a massive milestone. But then we hit 1831. This was a major turning point, and it led directly to the huge institutional fractures we see by 1843. So what exactly happened in 1831?
Well, the spark that ignited this whole timeline was William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison was trained as a printer's apprentice in New Jersey by a Quaker who was fiercely dedicated to the anti-slavery cause. He took those strong convictions right to Boston, and on January 1, 1831, he began publishing an abolitionist journal called the Public Liberator and Journal of the Times. Garrison's stance? Completely uncompromising. He didn't want a gradual phase-out. Actually, scratch that. He demanded the immediate liberation of all slaves without any discussion whatsoever. You were either entirely for him or you were against him. He purposely drew a massive line in the sand. And honestly, sometimes to move a colossal cause forward, you need a personality that utterly refuses to bend, and Garrison was exactly that.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Great Church Divide, the theological fracture. As Garrison's unbendable stance gained serious traction, major religious institutions simply couldn't hold it together anymore.
To understand how these splits happened, we kind of have to look back at the original ideals of these churches. Take John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. He despised slavery. He famously called it that villainy of villainies, and initially his followers shared this strict view. But over time, there was this gradual creep, and some Methodists actually began owning slaves. This absolutely infuriated the staunch abolitionists in the church. One minister, a guy with the unforgettable name of Orange Scott, was so incensed by this compromise that he broke away entirely. He formed the Wesleyan Methodist Church in 1843, strictly forbidding slave ownership. And this wasn't just some minor disagreement. It tore the largest institutions in the country in half. In 1844, the Methodist Episcopal Church officially split right down the middle over whether a bishop could be a slaveholder, creating the Methodist Episcopal Church South. Right around the same time, in 1844 and 1845, the Baptists fractured over whether appointed missionaries could hold slaves. This led directly to the formation of the Southern Baptist Convention, a name you might still recognize today. The Presbyterians held on a little bit longer, but ultimately split into northern and southern branches near the end of the Civil War in 1864. The intense debate over the morality of slavery literally redrew the map of American Protestantism.
Which brings us to Section 3, churches that stayed united, the exceptions. This is where the story gets a bit unexpected, because not all churches fractured. Let's contrast the splitters with the denominations that actually managed to stay whole.
So why didn't everyone divide? Well, for the Congregationalists, it was simple geography. They were heavily concentrated up north in New England, so they already had a pretty unified abolitionist spirit. The Episcopalians were spread out, but they let local churches make their own choices. Plus, they were super distracted by the Oxford movement, which was this big shift toward traditional high church rituals. The Roman Catholic Church, despite the Pope condemning the slave trade, maintained unity in America by just allowing the local status quo to remain, believing that gradual social legislation would eventually fix things. But the Lutherans? They had a highly specific theological reason for staying united. The Lutherans leaned hard on Martin Luther's theology of two governments. It's basically this idea that human beings live under the government of the church, which handles your spiritual life, and the government of the state, which handles your civic life. And these two spheres, they shouldn't entangle. For Lutherans at the time, slavery was viewed strictly as a political matter for the state to solve. By deciding not to mix the spiritual church with a civic political issue, the National Lutheran Church dodged a massive institutional split, letting each local group make its own call.
All right, part 4, a holy civil war, God on both sides. Eventually, all this tension broke and the Civil War erupted.
What makes this conflict so unique to study is that both the North and the South use the exact same religion and the exact same Bible to claim divine backing. Talk about a profound theological paradox, right? Just look at this contrast. You had a common Southern prayer asking God to lay thou their legions low and let the proud spoiler know God's on our side. Southerners viewed the war as a defense against malicious Northern interference. Meanwhile, Northerners are belting out Julia Ward Howe's Battle Hymn of the Republic, loudly proclaiming that God is marching to punish Southern sins. Both sides were absolutely 100% convinced of their own moral purity, praying for total victory.
This brings us to Section 5, Lincoln's nuanced view, finding meaning in chaos. Amidst all this absolute certainty and theological crossfire, Abraham Lincoln offered a much more sophisticated take.
Lincoln stepped back and proposed 3 really profound rules. First, he urged everyone to be just a little less confident that they fully knew the exact purposes of God. Second, he asked people to acknowledge the sheer ambiguity and messiness of history, because history is almost never as neat as we try to make it. And third, he challenged Americans to actually question the unquestionable moral purity of their own side. Lincoln saw that holding on to this absolute, self-righteous certainty was completely blinding people to the shared tragedy of the war.
Taking Lincoln's advice to heart, a movement began among some ministers to preach a message of penitence rather than just cheering for victory. They started asking their congregations to confess their own faults and seek reconciliation. Historians Askew and Perard summarize it perfectly. They began to view the devastating war as a sacrificial and cleansing tragedy. It's like they hoped this immense, terrible suffering had the potential not just to preserve the borders on a map, but to truly regenerate the nation from the inside out. Finally, Section 6, Rise of the Black Church, a triumph of independence. Out of this entire era of immense friction, theological hypocrisy, and just devastating war, emerged one of the most inspiring developments in American Christianity. A pivotal figure in this story is Richard Allen. You see, even in northern cities like Philadelphia, there was tremendous racial friction within congregations. Black Christians often faced intense prejudice from the very people who claimed to be anti-slavery. Recognizing this glaring hypocrisy, Richard Allen took a monumental step. In 1814, he founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church, becoming its first bishop. And get this, he was ordained by Francis Asbury, a major Methodist leader, which powerfully validated this brand new independent denomination. The growth of this movement was absolutely staggering. To put this in perspective, in 1860, the AME Church had about 22,000 members. But by 1896, that number exploded to nearly 500,000. This wasn't just a church anymore, it was a flourishing, fully independent institution. They went on to establish the very first black magazine in America and the first university for black Americans, the whole shebang. It was a true triumph of resilience in the face of deep national division. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question. We've looked at how a deeply fractured landscape tore our nation apart, with everyone completely certain they were right. It really makes you wonder, if we took Abraham Lincoln's 3 rules, embracing a little less moral certainty, acknowledging the messiness of history, and practicing just a bit more humility, and applied them to the cultural and political divides we experience today, how would it change our modern history? Definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive, and as always, keep asking the big questions.